This is the battleground for one of the world's longest wars. From the air, it looks peaceful, but that forest is home to a guerrilla army that's been battling the Colombian state for more than 50 years. 5 decades of fighting in Colombia between the army and guerrilla groups once brought this country to its knees. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia are now in talks to sign a truce with the government. But these mountains below are their territory. The war isn't over. This country has seen unimaginable suffering. More than 220,000 people have been killed in the conflict, and more than 6 million forced to leave their homes. A generation has grown up here knowing only violent struggle.
Colombia es un país manso, que se torna violento con mucha facilidad. Noble, pero peligroso.
Against a backdrop of lawlessness, one man almost single-handedly created an illegal billion-dollar empire and left a legacy of chaos and criminality.
Pablo Escobar has maybe permanently traumatized Colombian society.
It's a story that's almost too unbelievable to be true. Now, with an end to the conflict finally within reach, I've come to Colombia to find out whether people here have faith in a post-war future, and to see if a country scarred by conflict can really come together and heal.
Tenemos los corazones enfermos, llenos de resentimiento, de odio y de otras cosas. Entonces, ¿qué tenemos que hacer? Es llegar y cómo empezar a cambiar y transformar ese corazón, cómo empezar a transformar el pensamiento.
On my journey, I'll get caught up in an ideological battle between Colombia's elites and the working classes.
They've just fired tear gas at the protesters and everyone's just running in the opposite direction. It's very strong.
I'll meet a trafficker for whom drug dealing runs in the family. And I'll visit the town security forces call the land of the guerrillas to see if people there can imagine a Colombia free from fighting. Colombia is a country defined by its geography. It's often said that large parts are too remote to be controlled from the capital. An unofficial ceasefire between FARC rebels and the government has been in place since last September, while peace negotiators meet in Cuba. But in the rural communities in the north and south of Colombia, guerrilla groups operate with impunity.
They assume as if the FARC were a defeated rebel force, and they are not. They have not been defeated in over 50 years of war. They still have about 8,000 combatants, and they've been able to reproduce themselves over and over through the years.
The FARC have abandoned this part of Colombia, but in their wake, they've left silent killers. Tens of thousands of buried landmines that have killed more than 11,000 people since 1990.
A mine doesn't discriminate. Race, age, nothing. It does one job. It's a soldier who never sleeps, never tires, and doesn't ask for food.
Colombia is second only to Afghanistan in the number of people killed or maimed by landmines, and the town of Cocorná has been one of the worst hit. Specially trained teams comb these fields every day, plot by plot, using basic tools, intense focus, and many precautions. First, a sweep for invisible string, a visual survey, metal detection, and eventually digging. Repeated again and again every few inches. Soldiers have dug up more than 600 mines in this area. Most are made of improvised materials. As part of the peace process, the FARC has agreed to help find more.
It'll be a huge support to us if the guerrillas guide us to the mines they themselves planted, the ones we don't yet know of. We need all the assistance we can get so we can help more people.
One soldier told me he wonders what it will be like to work side by side with a FARC fighter, someone he would hold responsible for the loss of life and limb among friends. The FARC is Colombia's oldest enemy and began its Marxist insurgency in 1964. The guerrilla group said it represented the rural poor in a struggle against Colombia's wealthier classes. They financed their struggle by kidnapping, extorting civilians, and trafficking drugs. By the 1990s, the FARC controlled almost a third of the country and its drug routes, forcing Colombia's president to turn to Washington.
I want to bring you a piece of good news, especially for Colombia's poorest and most in need. Today, the House of Representatives in the United States approved the first stage of an aid package with which this country will implement Plan Colombia.
Under Plan Colombia, the U.S. donated billions of dollars and new weapons as part of its so-called war on drugs. The newly equipped Colombian army decimated the FARC's ranks from more than 20,000 fighters to around 7,000 who remain today. But for the last 4 years, the FARC and the government have been in talks to sign a peace deal and end the war for good. For Colombians, this moment was historic. The FARC's commander-in-chief, known as Timoshenko, and Colombia's president, Juan Manuel Santos, side by side in Havana, pledging to finalize a peace deal by March of this year. But the deadline came and went, and there's still no deal. Experts put it down to deep distrust, forged in a climate of fear and retribution. Many in Bogotá, including Colombia's political opposition, are against making peace with the FARC and believe their crimes should not go unpunished.
So here we have terrorists who've used bombs, mistreated people, used kidnapping as an official financing tool, and remain the biggest drug traffickers in Colombia and in the world today, being included in talks as equal partners and legitimate representatives of a segment of Colombian society. We don't stand for it.
But supporters of the FARC accuse the Colombian state of being the terrorists. They point to a failed round of peace talks in the mid-90s, which ended in a massacre of 3,000 FARC supporters.
The guerrilla formed a political party that was totally exterminated by right-wing elements. So of course they're very afraid about laying down their weapons and participating in democracy. They fear that they will be killed as soon as they lay down their weapons and they form a political party.
Colombia is as used to peacemaking as it is to war. In fact, over the years, peace deals with guerrilla groups have come and gone with little success. But President Santos believes this peace deal with the FARC is different, and that he can end the last armed struggle in the Western Hemisphere.
Supporters of the peace deal say the two sides are close to sealing it. They've agreed on land reform to develop rural areas for poor farmers, political participation of rebels once a deal is signed, working together to stop the drug trade, and amnesty to FARC fighters, except those who've committed the most serious crimes. But they haven't agreed on a timetable for disarmament or demobilization from their camps in the forest. For President Santos, this deal has been a political gamble. His approval ratings have plummeted to 13%. Many Colombians do want peace, but some feel the whole process is a distraction from other issues.
I'm sick. The state sickens me. The health system sickens me. The education sickens me. The government sickens me.
And protesters don't feel they're being heard.
Right, so the protesters have just been running in this direction because police were firing tear gas at them, and now they're grabbing rocks, so it could get ugly.
Political violence has hurt and killed too many in Colombia. Everywhere you go, people speak of how they've been touched by the conflict. Victims like Blanca Nubia Diaz may never heal, but she often comes here to Bogotá's Memorial Center to gather strength.
A ella la mataron en el Pozo La Cantera. Ella fue violada, fue torturada, fue desaparecida, que en esa época mataron muchas mujeres, muchas niñas, antes de mi hija, que les echaron ácido de batería. Yo era una persona que también vivía con miedo, pero yo hablo aquí porque vine a Bogotá y me empoderé y cogí fuerza y lucha para hablar. Yo creo que para mí no existe el perdón, porque a mi hija no me la vuelven. Mi hija, lo que le hicieron, el daño que le hicieron y me hicieron a mí, a mi familia, yo como mamá y en la forma que hicieron con mi hija, yo nunca perdonaría a esa gente. No, mi Dios me perdone, pero no lo perdono.
Blanca Nubia and thousands more like her find it difficult to forgive and forget. Colombia's peace deal has been hammered out in Bogotá and Havana. But the trail of destruction caused by half a century of war begins in the countryside. I'm traveling to Medellín, capital of Antioquia province, along a road where kidnapping and violence used to be a way of life. It winds alongside the Magdalena River, one of the most productive fishing areas in the country. Juan Esteban has worked on these waters all his life. He remembers a time when the bodies of victims were a regular sight here.
First we saw them whole, then they began appearing in pieces. They said they were fighting for territory. The guerrillas wanted the whole region, and the paramilitaries fought back.
And how many bodies would you see a day?
Usually 3 or 4 every day.
But this part of Colombia used to be notorious for a different kind of fishing, where motorists were the catch and guerrilla fighters were the fishermen.
One of their most lucrative schemes is known as the pesca milagrosa, or miraculous catch. They would come down from the mountains, block the roads, and try to snatch a valuable hostage.
These days, security is much better. Night runs by trucks have resumed, helping business to flourish again. Colombia's murder rate has also been falling since the 90s. I'm traveling to a city that was once called the most violent place on earth to see how things have changed. Medellín, the bright lights of Colombia's second largest city. 20 years after the world's most famous drug trafficker was killed on a rooftop, this city is still synonymous with the cocaine trade. At its height, Pablo Escobar's Medellín cartel earned more than $4 billion a year. Back then, cocaine was Colombia's biggest export, contributing up to a quarter of its overseas earnings. The cartel days are now over, but Medellín remains a center for a new kind of drug trade by microtraficantes, small, independent operators who fueled a new domestic market. I've come to meet one of them, a man who still idolizes Pablo Escobar, but says things are done differently now.
Many of us have operated drug businesses their whole life. My grandmother had one, my mother inherited it. I took it on, and my son is already involved. Entire families can live from it. It's a business you pass down. The cartels fell, but the amount of drugs we traffic in this country, in this city, has stayed the same. They got Pablo Escobar, but then there were 10, 20 new Escobars. It's not changed. I think, in fact, it's become worse.
This is the new face of Colombia's drug trade. It's small scale, but definitely not small time.
Coca cultivation has been on the rise for 3 years in a row now, is now almost back at the level of before Plan Colombia. So you're dealing with like the exact volume of drug trafficking, of cocaine trafficking, as you saw 15 years ago.
And this is where it all begins, in the coca plantations hidden deep in the countryside. These leaves are the fuel that fires Colombia's drug trade and funds its guerrilla groups, and cultivation is up. That's partly because last year, Colombian authorities stopped their policy of spraying herbicides, saying the chemicals probably cause cancer. But the United States, who backs the program, says it fears that coca farming profits are being pocketed by guerrillas and criminal gangs. In the hills around Medellin lies the former headquarters of one of the most feared criminal gangs of all time. You can still visit Pablo Escobar's massive estate. His once famous car collection lies rusting in the open. And many of the exotic animals he imported are still here. Thanks to Escobar's whims, Colombia now has the largest population of hippos outside of Africa.
These ruins are all that's left of Pablo Escobar's mansion. This was his outdoor pool. In fact, you can still see some of the tiling intact. And just opposite was the main house. And he hid here from his enemies and Colombia's authorities. But still, his ostentatious lifestyle was in plain view.
From his private airstrip, Escobar could fly everything from politicians to drugs in and out of Hacienda Nápoles. But those heights of excess and impunity are a thing of the past. In towns across the country, Semana Santa or Holy Week celebrations paint a different picture of Colombia. Processions of penance show a people devoted to their faith. Colombians were hoping that this Easter would usher in a new era of peace and stability, the week the government and the FARC had promised to come to an agreement. Now that the deadline has been missed, many are losing faith in the peace process.
Colombia has seen many years of violence, all kinds of violence. We all had high hopes for this peace deal, but let's pray that this vicious cycle will end soon.
I think eventually this deal can be signed. Let's hope so. But I'm convinced it won't bring peace because there are other violent groups in this country.
We've lost all faith that this deal can be achieved. They've been trying for years.
The biggest remaining barrier to an agreement is the issue of weapons. The FARC don't want to hand in their guns until the government meets their demands, and the government won't agree to the FARC's demands until they hand in their guns. I'm traveling to a town inside guerrilla territory to see if people there believe the deadlock can be broken.
We're headed to Ituango. It's a small town deep in the Colombian countryside. The jungles surrounding it are full of FARC encampments. Now, Ituango itself, though, is known as a fierce battleground between guerrilla forces, the paramilitary groups defending their land, and also the Colombian military.
Ituango is a town of campesinos, farmers who've been working the surrounding fields for generations. For as long as many can remember, the FARC has been around too.
Well, it's no secret. Everyone knows here in Ituango, we've had a history of armed groups living among us. Some people have even become used to living under certain rules.
Years of intense fighting has left the town on permanent high alert.
Now this might look like a military encampment, but actually it's the local police station here. And the reason it's so heavily fortified is because it comes under frequent attack. In fact, just months ago, guerrilla fighters arrived on this square and launched grenades at these walls. Now, police officers and authorities are often the target of armed groups. Today, the flags are flying at half-mast because 3 police officers were shot dead on the coast.
The FARC's influence here is strong. Local officials told me armed militia appear often to demand money from shop owners. They also describe the local farming association as a political front used by the FARC. Like the Marxist fighters, they say they've been wronged by the state.
Santos and Uribe have been fighting for bankers and landowners, and they think the country is fine. But peace is not just about silencing guns, it's about doing away with the rich syndicates enriching themselves.
So do you believe the FARC will actually give up their weapons?
They want to keep them at hand because they don't know at what moment the government is going to go back on their promises.
If a peace deal is signed, FARC guerrillas are expected to come out of the jungle and resettle in towns like this. Ituango has been shortlisted to receive about 2,000 fighters. But walking around the town, you get the sense they're already here.
So this is the kind of mail some people get here in Ituango. It's a short magazine called Resistencia, published by the FARC's 18th Front. On the cover are some of the guerrilla leaders who've been killed. Inside, there's information about the peace process. And at the back, there's a crossword. The people of Ituango are ready for peace, and the prospect that guerrillas and victims might one day live side by side, face to face. Like this man, who lost his leg because of a landmine planted by guerrillas. But he told me he doesn't hold a grudge. But a deal with the FARC won't necessarily mean peace for Colombia. The ELN rebel group still has about 3,000 fighters. A deal with them will also have to be reached. And the criminal gangs that now control the drug trade are as strong as ever. Deep in the Colombian jungle, small military outposts are on constant watch and need regular resupply. Soldiers are aware of many enemies and move fast, unloading food, fuel, and new personnel. Since 2014, the FARC hasn't engaged in large-scale combat, but continues to ambush small army units like this. Just 3 months ago, one of their Black Hawks was obliterated during a drop-off. When the war with the FARC eventually ends, things will change. U.S. military aid will shrink, and the Colombian army will turn its guns on other groups. For the FARC,
a peace deal will force them to abandon the forest and the only life they've known to rejoin a society. The people of Colombia have come a long way in their quest for peace. An eventual truce with the FARC will spell the end of one war and the beginning of a new reality in Colombia, one that won't be mapped out in Havana by politicians, but here in the rural towns and villages most affected by half a century of fighting. People here have grown used to violence and tragedy, and building bridges with old enemies won't be easy, and it will take many years. But they are the ones who hold the key to lasting peace in their country.